Chapter 1. The Cursed Breeding Ritual. On the distant planet of Xanthelis, a world whose very atmosphere shimmered with violet and teal hues from its twin moons, there existed a race of beings known as the HFY. They were a species born of alien intelligence, a form of life that was both beautiful and terrifying, as though crafted by the stars themselves. Their skin, a luminous blend of opalescent colors, glowed faintly in the dark of their sprawling jungles, where towering trees whispered ancient secrets carried by the wind. Their people were gifted with an almost ethereal grace, and their sharp, angular features made them appear regal in ways beyond human comprehension. But for all their splendor, there was something deeply unsettling about them, something that only the few outsiders who ventured to Xanthelis could truly understand: their obsession with reproduction, the way their entire society revolved around a ritual that could only be described as a curse. At the heart of their society, beneath the beauty of their culture, was a tradition that no HFY could escape, no matter their rank, no matter their beauty. It was a cruel and ancient practice that bound their fates to an unyielding cycle, one that a young female of their species, Talisa, had learned to dread with every passing day. Talisa had been born into a world that celebrated beauty, intellect, and the continuation of their species. But for all her intelligence and charm, Talisa had been marked from birth, not as a leader, but as a vessel, a tool for reproduction. The HFY had long ago established that their breeding ritual was sacred, a necessary component of their survival. Each female was destined to bear children at the command of the ruling council, regardless of her personal desires or feelings. It was a ritual as old as the planet itself, a tradition passed down through generations, never to be questioned, never to be defied. The council decided the timing, the partner, and the moment in which each female would fulfill her role. It was a law of nature that they all accepted, an inescapable fate for every HFY woman. Talisa had spent her life watching the other females of her species come of age, knowing full well that her own time would come soon enough. She had always tried to ignore it, to focus on the beauty of the world around her: the massive waterfalls that cascaded through the emerald forests, the soft hum of the planet's electric pulse, the stars that seemed so close you could reach out and touch them. But despite her love for her world and its many wonders, there was a growing sense of dread within her. As the moons of Xanthelis waxed and waned, she could feel the council's eyes on her, waiting for her to mature, waiting for the day they would call her forth to fulfill her duty. And then, the day arrived. Talisa had just turned 23, a ripe age by HFY standards, and the council's decision had been made. She was to be paired with one of the strongest and most respected males of her species, a warrior named Kale. Kale was a magnificent specimen, his body honed to perfection, his mind sharp, his will unwavering. He had been chosen by the council not just for his physical prowess, but for his ability to produce offspring who would carry on the HFY bloodline. His eyes, a deep shade of violet, had always held a certain intensity that made Talisa uneasy, as though he could see right through her, as though he knew exactly what she was destined for. And now, he would be the one to claim her. The ritual was simple, but deeply invasive. Once a female was selected, she would be taken to the sacred breeding chambers where the mating would take place. It was done in public, witnessed by the council, and expected of every member of the female population. There was no choice. There was no question. The female's body was merely a means to an end, her autonomy stripped away in the face of tradition. It was something that Talisa had tried desperately to avoid thinking about for years, but now, as she stood on the precipice of her fate, she could no longer ignore it. Her heart pounded in her chest as she entered the grand hall, the walls adorned with intricate carvings of the HFY's ancient history, their stories immortalized in stone. She could feel the eyes of the council on her, their cold stares like knives cutting through her skin. Each one of them was a ruler in their own right, members of the highest caste, their decision-making powers absolute. They stood in a circle, their cloaks flowing behind them, their faces obscured by the shadows, watching her every movement with calculated precision. Kale stood at the center of the room, his towering form looming over her like a storm cloud. His presence filled the space, his eyes never leaving hers as he approached, his muscular frame moving with a predatory grace. Talisa could feel her breath hitch in her chest as he closed the distance between them, his hand reaching out to brush a stray lock of hair from her face. His touch was cold, mechanical, nothing like the gentle warmth she had always dreamed of in her fantasies. He was a tool of the council, no different than she was. "You are ready," Kale said, his voice a deep, resonant growl that sent shivers down her spine. Talisa wanted to recoil, to fight back against the feeling of helplessness that gnawed at her insides, but there was nowhere to run. The council had spoken, and there was no escaping their decree. She was his now, to do with as he pleased. The weight of her reality settled like a stone in her stomach. As the ritual began, Talisa's mind went blank. She had been trained for this moment, taught to accept her fate without resistance. The ceremony was a matter of tradition, of societal structure, of preserving the future of their species. It was something she had been taught to accept without question. But the more she looked at Kale, the more she realized that this was not something she could accept so easily. Her heart screamed in protest, her body trembling as the reality of her situation set in. But just as the ritual was about to begin, something extraordinary happened, something that would change everything. A loud crash echoed through the hall as the ground beneath them shook. The walls trembled, and the ceiling groaned as though the very building itself was coming apart. The council's members shouted in alarm, their voices rising in panic as a great force ripped through the sacred chamber. Talisa stumbled, falling to the floor as a blinding light pierced the air. She heard a roar, something alien and powerful, followed by a voice human, unmistakably human. "Get away from her," the voice commanded, its tone fierce, unwavering. Kale, for the first time, looked genuinely startled, his head snapping toward the source of the noise. Talisa, her heart racing, watched in awe as a figure emerged from the shadows. Human man, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair a stark contrast to his pale skin. He was armed, his weapon raised, and there was a fire in his eyes that Talisa had never seen before in any of her kind. The human advanced, his eyes locked on hers, and for the first time in her life, Talisa felt a sense of safety, something that had been missing for as long as she could remember. She had been doomed to a life of servitude, a life where her very existence had been reduced to that of a breeding tool, but now, there was hope. This human had come for her, and for the first time, Talisa felt something stir deep within her, something more than fear, something more than resignation. "Come with me," the human said, his voice low but urgent. "I won't let them do this to you." Talisa blinked, her mind reeling as the reality of the situation began to sink in. She had never known there was a world beyond her own, a world where freedom existed, where someone would fight for her, to protect her from the horrors she had been forced to endure. She didn't know who this human was, or how he had arrived on Xanthilis, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. He had come for her, and he was her only chance at survival. Before she could even process her thoughts, the human reached out, pulling her to her feet and guiding her toward the exit, away from the council, away from her fate. But the VHYRRH were not so easily deterred. The VHYRRH warriors in the room stood frozen for a split second, unsure of what to do. The sudden appearance of the human, his weapon raised and his demeanor resolute, had completely caught them off guard. They were warriors, true, bred for battle and strength, but they had never faced an adversary quite like this before. The malevolent silence that had once filled the room erupted into a flurry of movement, as several of the council's guards moved forward, their long, spindly arms outstretched, as though to subdue this intruder. But the human was quick. He swung his weapon, an energy blade, glowing with a fierce, electric blue light, and in one fluid motion, incapacitated two of the guards who had dared to approach. Talisa gasped as she watched the flash of light streak through the room, the energy blade cutting through the air with precision. It wasn't just the weapon that left her in awe, but the sheer ferocity with which the human wielded it. The VHYRRH warriors were strong, but their strength was rooted in their biology, in their natural abilities. The human, however, seemed to possess something far more dangerous, a fire, a will, that transcended their mere physical prowess. "Stay close," the human commanded, his voice sharp, and without hesitation, Talisa followed him. She had no choice, no time to question what was happening. Every instinct she had told her that this was her chance, her one and only opportunity to escape the hellish fate that awaited her. She took a deep breath and, as the human pulled her further into the chamber, she glanced back. The council members were still in shock, their faces twisted with disbelief. Talisa could see that they were scrambling to regain control of the situation, but it was too late. The human had already proven that he was not someone to be trifled with. And though she didn't know how he had arrived here, or why he had come for her, she couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just another tool, another commodity to be used by her people. She was a person, someone worthy of saving. The human led her toward a narrow exit at the back of the chamber, his pace quickening as more guards scrambled to intercept them. Talisa could hear their harsh, alien voices calling out orders, their language unintelligible to her, but the urgency in their tone was clear. They were about to lose control of the situation, and they would not allow that to happen without a fight. But the human was faster. His steps were steady and sure, his focus unyielding as he guided her through the labyrinth of corridors that wound beneath the council's chambers. Talisa's heart hammered in her chest, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. She didn't know where they were going or what awaited them outside, but one thing was certain: this was her chance. She was free. "You're going to be okay," the human said, glancing back at her as they moved through the corridors. "I'm getting you out of here." Talisa couldn't speak, couldn't find the words to express the emotions that were bubbling up inside her. She felt a deep sense of relief, yes, but also confusion. Who was this human? What did he want with her? Why had he come all the way to Xanthilis for her? Before she could voice any of her questions, they reached a small, dimly lit room. The human paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. When he was satisfied that the coast was clear, he turned to her, his expression softening for the first time since their encounter. "Stay here for a moment," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I'll get us out of this mess. Just keep your head down, and don't make a sound." Talisa nodded, her hands trembling as she took a seat against the wall. She didn't understand everything that was happening, but for the first time, she didn't feel like a piece of property. She felt like a person with choices, a person with freedom. And that, in itself, was a gift she had never imagined possible. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the room, and Talisa's heart skipped a beat. She held her breath, waiting for the human's next move. She couldn't afford to be caught now, not when they were so close to escaping. The door to the room creaked open, and the human stepped back in, a grim look on his face. He was holding a small, portable device, a communicator. It seemed his fingers flying across the interface as he worked quickly. "They're going to be looking for us, but I've got a way out," he said, his voice low. "We're not safe yet, but we'll be out of here soon." Talisa barely had time to process his words before the communicator beeped, and a green light flashed on the device. The human smiled, a brief but genuine expression. "It's ready. Let's go." Without a second thought, Talisa followed him as he led her down another corridor, this one quieter than the others. They passed through several more doors and hallways before they reached a docking bay, where a small shuttle sat waiting, its engines already humming with power. Talisa's eyes widened as she took in the sleek design of the ship, small, but fast, a vessel built for escape. She had never seen anything like it, but in that moment, it was exactly what she needed. The human ushered her aboard, his movements quick but purposeful. As she stepped into the shuttle, she could feel her legs shaking, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She had no idea where this human had come from, or what his intentions were, but she knew one thing for certain. He was her chance at freedom. Before she could ask him anything, the shuttle's doors slammed shut, and the engines roared to life. They were in the air before she could even register the speed at which they were moving. Talisa glanced out the viewport, watching as the council's massive palace grew smaller and smaller, fading into the distance as they soared toward the unknown. The human's voice cut through the hum of the engines. "I know you probably have a million questions right now, but let me start by saying this. My name's Mark. I'm from Earth, and I came here to stop what they were going to do to you. I didn't know who you were at first, but now, well, I'm not about to let anyone make you a tool of their twisted traditions." Talisa stared at him, her heart racing. "You saved me. But why? Why would you risk your life for someone like me?" Mark glanced at her, a wry smile playing at the corner of his lips. I'm not about to let some alien council turn a woman into a breeding tool. No one deserves that. His tone was firm, filled with a resolve that Talisa couldn't help but admire. You deserve better. The words settled in her chest, heavy and warm, like a promise that had yet to be fulfilled. For the first time in her life, Talisa allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something beyond the cruel fate she had been born into. And in that moment, as the stars streaked by outside the shuttle, she realized that her journey was only just beginning. Chapter 2. A World Beyond the Stars. The shuttle rocked slightly as it broke through Xanthilus's atmosphere, heading toward the vast expanse of space. Talisa watched in awe as the view outside shifted from the bright, alien surface of her home planet to the deep blackness of the cosmos. The stars seemed closer here, almost within reach, and the sensation of freedom, so foreign to her, began to settle in her bones. She had always known there was more to the universe than the confines of Xanthilus, but she had never dreamed it could be so vast, so boundless. Mark had given her space to process, his attention focused on piloting the shuttle away from the planet's orbit. As they moved further into deep space, Talisa felt her mind racing with questions. She had so many questions for him, so many things she needed to understand. Who was he really? Why had he risked everything to save her? And where would they go now? She had no family, no home left on Xanthilus. The life she had known had been torn away from her in a matter of moments, and though she was grateful to be free, she had no idea what came next. Eventually, Mark broke the silence, his voice calm but filled with an urgency that caught Talisa's attention. We can't stay in this sector for too long. The VHYRRH will be after us, and they don't take kindly to interference. He glanced at her, his expression serious. But we'll figure it out. We'll find a safe place. I promise. Talisa nodded, though her heart was still heavy with uncertainty. How did you get here? She asked, her voice tentative. What do you want from me? Mark hesitated for a moment before responding. I came here on a mission and investigation. I didn't know what I was walking into, but when I saw what they were doing to you, I couldn't just sit back and let it happen. As for what I want, I don't expect anything from you, Talisa. I'm here because I believe in freedom. And you deserve that. I'm not leaving you until you get it. His words were sincere, and though she still had doubts, Talisa couldn't help but feel a spark of hope flicker in her chest. For the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. She had a purpose beyond just existing, and maybe, just maybe, she could start to live for herself. As the shuttle accelerated into the unknown, the hum of the engines became a comforting background noise, a steady reminder that Talisa was no longer bound by the cruel constraints of her world. The vastness of space stretched before them, infinite and full of possibilities, and for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future one where she could choose her own path. But the weight of her past hung heavily on her shoulders, a chain that refused to be broken easily. Her mind was still tangled in confusion and fear, her thoughts racing with questions she could barely form into words. Mark, sensing her internal turmoil, offered her a reassuring smile, though she could tell it was strained. I know it's overwhelming, he said, his voice soft and understanding. But take it one step at a time. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. Talisa looked at him, her heart heavy with emotion. She wasn't used to kindness like this, not the kind that didn't come with strings attached, not the kind that wasn't a part of some hidden agenda. He hadn't asked for anything in return. He had simply come to her rescue, without hesitation, without any expectation of reward. In a galaxy that had only known her as a breeding vessel, Mark's sincerity felt like a balm to her wounded soul. Where are we going? She asked, her voice tentative, unsure of the direction her life was about to take. I'm not sure yet, Mark replied, his gaze focused on the controls in front of him. There's a neutral zone not far from here, a place where the VHYRRH don't have any influence. It'll give us some time to think, plan, and figure out what comes next. It's not a perfect solution, but it's the best I can offer right now. Talisa nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She had no idea what lay ahead, no idea what the future would hold, but for the first time, she didn't feel like a prisoner. She didn't feel like she was simply being dragged along by the tides of fate. She was free, even if only for a moment, and that moment felt like a lifetime. As the shuttle continued its journey through the stars, Talisa couldn't help but let her mind wander. She thought of her people, the VHYRRH, how they had treated her, how they had reduced her to nothing more than a tool. She thought of her home on Xanthelis, the lush, glowing jungles that had once felt so familiar, now so distant. Her life had been a prison, and she had been its prisoner, a puppet dancing to the whims of a society that viewed her as nothing more than a means to an end. But now, as the stars stretched out before her, she began to wonder what it would be like to truly live, to make her own choices, to define her own destiny. She turned to Mark, who was still focused on the controls. He hadn't looked at her yet, but she could tell he was aware of her gaze. After a moment, he glanced at her, offering a small smile. "It's going to be okay," he said, as though he could sense the turmoil still swirling inside her. "You're not alone anymore." Talisa swallowed, her throat tight with emotion. She had never allowed herself to hope before. Hope had always been a luxury she couldn't afford. But in that moment, she felt a spark of it, something deep within her that told her maybe, just maybe, she could have a future that was hers to choose. The shuttle continued its journey, and though the path ahead was uncertain, Talisa felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't the peace of resolution, not yet, but it was a kind of quiet determination, a realization that she was no longer bound by her past. She could make a choice now. She could take control of her life. Chapter 3: The Neutral Zone. The shuttle drifted silently through space, a small speck against the endless void. Mark had given Talisa space to process, allowing the hum of the engines to fill the silence between them. The stars outside the viewport were breathtaking, their brilliance unmatched by anything she had ever seen on Xanthelis. Here, in the vast emptiness of space, there was no one to judge her, no council watching her every move. It was just her, the human who had saved her, and the promise of freedom hanging in the air like an unspoken vow. After what felt like an eternity, Mark finally spoke, his voice breaking the silence. "We're almost there. The neutral zone is just a few more hours away." Talisa turned her gaze to him, her mind still reeling from the events that had transpired. "What exactly is this neutral zone?" she asked, her voice steady but curious. She needed to know what came next. What was their plan? Where did they go from here? "It's a safe haven, mostly inhabited by mercenaries, traders, and others who have no stake in the VHYRRH's politics," Mark explained, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead. "It's one of the few places in the galaxy where the VHYRRH don't have control. We'll be able to lay low for a while, catch our breath, and figure out what we need to do next." "Will they come after us?" Talisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She was terrified of the VHYRRH, terrified of what would happen if they found her. Would they track her across the galaxy? Would they send armies to drag her back to Xanthelis? "They'll try," Mark said, his tone grim. "But we'll be ready for them. They won't expect us to be so far out, and we'll have some time to prepare before they realize we're gone." Talisa nodded, though the uncertainty in her heart remained. She knew that escaping Xanthelis, escaping the VHYRRH, was just the beginning of their struggle. There would be no safe place for her as long as they were searching for her. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel completely alone. Mark was with her. He had saved her when no one else had, and for that, she owed him more than she could express. The shuttle continued its course, the engines thrumming softly in the background. Talisa's mind wandered again, this time to the future. She had spent so many years thinking of nothing but survival, nothing but the next day, the next breath, the next order from the council. But now, there were possibilities. There was a world beyond the VHYRRH, beyond the council's suffocating grip. And for the first time, Talisa allowed herself to dream. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden beep of the shuttle's communication system. Mark glanced at the console, his expression immediately turning serious. "We're entering the neutral zone," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "This is it." Talisa felt a knot of tension tighten in her chest. It wasn't that she didn't trust Mark, it was the unknown. The neutral zone was a haven, yes, but it was also a place of chaos. The people there weren't bound by any laws, and danger lurked in every shadow. They would be safe for now, but what about later? What about when the VHYRRH inevitably found them? As the shuttle entered the neutral zone, Talisa took a deep breath, bracing herself for whatever came next. She wasn't sure what her future would look like, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going back to Xanthelis. Not ever. "We'll make it," Mark said, his voice steady, as though sensing her unease. I won't let them take you. Talisa looked at him, her gaze softening. She wasn't sure what this journey held for them, but in that moment, with the stars sprawling endlessly ahead, she realized she wasn't alone. And for the first time in her life, that was enough. The shuttle's engines hummed steadily as Mark piloted it through the dense, bustling sector known as the neutral zone, a part of space that had become a haven for outcasts, mercenaries, smugglers, and those seeking to escape the suffocating reach of the galactic powers. Talisa watched in awe as they passed through the outer fringes of the sector, the spaceport coming into view. It was nothing like Xanthelis, nothing like the polished beauty of her homeworld. Instead, the station was an amalgamation of various ships, hastily constructed docking bays, and areas of flickering neon signs that illuminated the deep, sprawling shadows of the starry backdrop. It was alive with activity, chaotic yet strangely comforting in its own way. Here, there was no council, no rules, no expectations. It was a place where anything could happen. Mark piloted the shuttle toward a quieter dock, where smaller ships and private vessels often landed. Talisa could feel the hum of her heart in her chest as they touched down, the shuttle's landing gear making a soft thud as it settled. She glanced out the viewport, her heart in her throat. For the first time in her life, she was truly free. Free from the control of the HFY, free from the breeding ritual that had haunted her since birth. But even in this moment of victory, she couldn't shake the sense of unease that lingered in her chest. She had escaped, yes, but there was still so much uncertainty. The HFY would not forget about her so easily. Their empire was vast, and their reach stretched across countless systems. What if they found her here? What if they sent agents to track her down, to drag her back to Xanthelis? Mark seemed to sense her worry. We'll be safe here for a while, he said, his voice calm and reassuring. I know people, Talisa. People who can help us stay off the radar. Talisa nodded, though her mind was still reeling. What's the next step? What happens now? He gave her a small, encouraging smile. Now we rest. We get our bearings. We can't keep running forever, but for the moment, we're safe. We'll figure out where to go next. He paused, his expression shifting to something more serious. And I'll keep you safe, no matter what. The sincerity in his words struck a chord deep within her. She didn't know if she could trust him completely. There were still so many unknowns, so many layers of their situation that hadn't been revealed, but in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope, a possibility for a future outside the suffocating grip of her people. And it was all because of this human, this stranger who had risked everything for her. As they disembarked from the shuttle, Talisa felt the cool air of the station brush against her skin. The artificial atmosphere felt different from her home planets, colder, less alive, but it was a welcome change. Here, she wasn't just a means to an end. She was a person. She was someone who could make choices, who could live as she saw fit. The thought was overwhelming, and she had to pause for a moment, letting the enormity of it all wash over her. Mark turned to her, his eyes scanning the area as he motioned for her to follow. Come on. I've arranged a place for us to stay. It's not much, but it'll be enough for now. Talisa followed him through the maze of corridors that wound through the station. The place was a hodgepodge of alien architecture, human ingenuity, and salvaged materials from countless ships. There was a certain beauty in the chaos, a rawness to it that reminded her of the freedom she had never known. As they walked, she couldn't help but feel that this was the beginning of something bigger than just escaping the council. This was the beginning of her life, her true life. Chapter 4, A New Beginning. Days passed, and as Talisa adjusted to her new life, the uncertainty of the future remained a constant companion. But even in the face of that uncertainty, she found solace in the small things, the quiet moments she shared with Mark, the way he always seemed to know just what to say when she felt lost, the way his presence had become a stabilizing force in the midst of the chaos. They had settled into a small, secluded apartment within the station, away from prying eyes. It wasn't much, just a few rooms with basic supplies, a bed, and a small kitchen, but it was a safe haven. For the first time in her life, Talisa was able to think for herself, to make decisions without fear of the council's judgment, without the constant pressure to conform to the role they had set for her. The HFY had reduced her to nothing more than a breeding vessel, a tool to be used for the continuation of their bloodline. But here, in this tiny corner of the galaxy, she was free. Mark had kept his promise. He had introduced her to a few trustworthy contacts within the neutral zone: mercenaries, smugglers, and exiles who had all found refuge here. They had helped them stay off the VHYRH's radar, keeping them hidden as they navigated the vast and unpredictable world of space. One evening, as Talisa sat by the window, gazing out at the twinkling lights of distant stars, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She had come so far, both physically and emotionally. The girl who had once been trapped in a world of duty and tradition had grown into someone unrecognizable, a woman who now had the power to choose her own destiny. Mark entered the room quietly, his footsteps soft against the metal floor. He had been spending more time with his contacts, working to ensure their continued safety, but tonight, he had come back earlier than usual. He stood by the door for a moment, watching her, and she could feel the weight of his gaze. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his voice gentle. Talisa turned toward him, offering a small smile. "I've just been thinking." "About what?" She hesitated for a moment, the weight of her emotions pressing down on her chest. "About everything. About what happens now. I never thought I'd have a future. I never thought I could escape, but now I have the chance to live. And I don't know what that means yet." Mark crossed the room and sat beside her, his gaze steady as he looked at her. "It means you're free, Talisa. You're free to make your own choices, to live your own life. And I'm here, every step of the way. Whatever you need." Her heart swelled with gratitude, but there was something more in her chest now, a warmth, a connection that went beyond words. She had come to rely on Mark in ways she hadn't expected, and the bond they shared had grown stronger with each passing day. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she admitted softly, her voice barely a whisper. Mark reached out, his hand resting gently on hers. "You don't have to worry about that anymore. You've got me, and I've got you." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the distant hum of the station around them. Talisa felt something shift within her, something she hadn't felt in years: hope. She had escaped the nightmare of her past, and while the future remained uncertain, she knew one thing for sure: she would never be a pawn in someone else's game again. She was free to choose her path, to live the life she had always dreamed of. And with Mark by her side, she knew that anything was possible,